It was 58 years ago that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Put out a call to people to join in Selma, Alabama, to march to Montgomery and to be present as advocacy for the Voting Rights Acts was building. And our friend and neighbor, Nicole D'Entremont, heeded that call. And tonight, she is going to tell us about that experience as we remember and as we move forward.
That's Reverend Will Green, pastor of the New Brackett Church here on Peaks Island, introducing Good Trouble on Saturday, March 25th, as Peaks Islanders commemorated the 58th anniversary of the end of the 1965 Selma to Montgomery March for voting rights and to protest the treatment and killing of civil rights activists. Nicole D'Entremont addressed the hope that she had for the presentation, what she wanted people to learn about the movement that night.
What we want to do this evening is to create the sort of energy that we had during that time. And certainly music was an essential part of that. And the choir, I can't thank the choir enough for joining this effort, because it was the music that got our feet marching, that stiffened your spine, that created cohesion in a group and encouraged nonviolence. Because if you have a force coming toward you and you are going to be arrested, if you can sing a song, you root yourself into that position, but in a way that's a little transcendent, because you're singing these strong words and you're doing it together. So I hope we can kind of have that feeling in the church today.
The presentation is part of an effort to raise funds for Foot Soldiers Park, an education center in Selma, Alabama, spearheaded by longtime civil rights activist Joanne Bland. Joanne marched in Selma as an 11-year-old child. The Peaks Island event raised over $2,500 for the effort.
Her vision is to build. It isn't there yet. That's why we are having donations for it. This is a call that's going out to the entire country through her website. But she wants to create a park for children that is dedicated to John Lewis, the very man that she, when she was 11 years old, went across the Pettus Bridge with.
The concept for the park isn't limited to just a park. It's also a place for people to learn about the history of the movement and the philosophy that powered it.
She wanted to do this, the park for John Lewis, and a study center where people could come and learn about nonviolence and the art of nonviolence, and study the movement that happened in the American South.
The importance of education in the movement can't be overstated. Nicole talks about the kids who were essential to the movement and what the community focused on in their civil rights education.
And the important thing about this, too, is that she wants it to be for the foot soldiers, the people who maybe aren't the icons, of the movement, the ones that like Martin Luther King, who was certainly magnificent. But there are many, many people who followed him, and he would agree with this, I'm sure, who deserve commemoration. And so I hope you will hear some names that maybe you haven't heard before or read in the history books. There had been Mississippi Summer the summer before, where 3 young people were killed. There had been freedom schools, and also these kids, they were learning from mentors, from students in SNCC and in Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and also the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They were learning techniques of resistance and nonviolence and Black history. They were learning Black history, and they were making Black history. And I think that was, frankly, better than any school. And I'm a school teacher, I was at one point.
Nonviolence, of course, was critical to the movement. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference and Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee believed in the power of nonviolent protest in the face of aggression and violence. That dedication was put to the test when they tried to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. Nicole explains what happened.
There's John Lewis in the white raincoat, and there's Hosea Williams, who was with Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and John Lewis was with SNCC. And what you see here are the troopers moving right away. They have gas masks ready to put on. They have their truncheons. And the man with the hand outstretched, it isn't Clark, it's somebody else. He says, "Go back to your church. This is an illegal march. Take yourselves back to your church." John Lewis says, "Sir, may I have a word?" The response is, "There will be no word." And they moved in. John Lewis is clubbed. He thought he would die on that bridge. And if you look at that video, it's very moving what he has to say, because he faced death there. They're clubbing people indiscriminately, and then they're tear gas. They shoved everything, they chased, and the shot that I couldn't show, the posse guys with their whips, whipping people.
In addition to being a principled position, nonviolence was also a smart strategy in a televised age. Millions of people saw how brutal the white establishment was towards the peaceful marchers, and it drew many to action, including Nicole, who at that time was in New York City, engaged in a different kind of social justice work.
I was working with the Catholic Worker at that time. I had been there for a year, working on the Bowery with a soup kitchen and a house of hospitality for folks who needed a place to stay. And I was writing for the paper, and I asked Dorothy Day, my boss, maybe some of you know of her, pretty legendary woman, if I wanted to write about Selma. I wanted to be there, I wanted to see what was going to happen, and I had a traveling companion, my friend Sean Calloway. He was an artist. I get a kick out of saying this. He was an artist, and he worked for Nativity Parish. Can you imagine that? That's when the church, it had John the 23rd, and now we have Francis, so that's a good omen. But anyway, Sean said he wanted to come too, and so I got the money from Dorothy Day, and we went down to the Port Authority, and I'll tell you the story. I'm still there. Okay, we had our backpacks and our sleeping bags, and Sean had, I thought, ill-advisedly decided to grow a little beard. And he's a tall, good-looking guy with curly hair, but he's got this little beard. And we're down there, I had the money, and so I went to the ticket agent, and he's kind of looking at me and looking at Sean, and I remember pushing the money under the till, the thing there, and he pawed it back. And he kind of looked again, and I said, I'd like, two round trip tickets to Montgomery. And he looked at me and he said, "Y'all want to buy life insurance?"
To me, this was the most engaging part of the presentation. Nicole shifted to a largely first-person narrative about what she saw and what she did in Selma as a 23-year-old looking to advance civil rights in our country. Next, Nicole talks about entering the South and the cultural war that was waged against the movement from the moment she got there.
First thing I saw crossing the county line into Montgomery was this big billboard with Martin Luther King, supposedly at a communist training school. This is a Highlander folk school for Gandhian nonviolence and folk song and wonderful, wonderful things. But the whole thing was that King was a communist and a threat, and everything that was being generated by him was a criminal.
Luckily, they were in for a friendlier reception once they reached the church. There she met James Orange of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
And so he welcomed us and told us, sort of tried to orient us. And then he gave us, we also got our ID. It says that I'm a visitor in Selma, Alabama. I've carried this in my wallet for 58 years. I'm a visitor in Selma, Alabama, and I can receive free meals. So I'm going to try to get down there next year and see if I can cash out
because of the risks to Northerners, or outside agitators as the locals called them. The white volunteers stayed with black families while they volunteered in Selma. You can hear Nicole's discomfort with using what was likely the best room that her host family had to offer.
I stayed at Mr. and Mrs. Edward Bell's home with their 5 daughters, tiny little space. I had their bedroom, I'm sure. It was a nice double bed. I don't know where Mr. and Mrs. Bell slept. I don't know where their 5 daughters slept. I hope I was a generous and considerate 23-year-old and thank them. I know I was in their bedroom. But that's how the black community totally embraced us. We could not go into the white community. We were outside agitators, and we had a target on our back, really, because of that.
Nicole's first march almost seemed like a training opportunity, so that way they could practice the tools of the nonviolent movement. The white volunteers were to go to the white section of town and protest in front of the mayor's house. Nicole recalls that the group was nervous on that first outing.
We did end up in front of Mayor Smitherman's place, and Wilson Baker was already there, and the police cars were there. And Sean and I joined these other white folks, and they were, right hand over your left, and swaying back and forth and singing "We Shall Overcome" in a very white rendition. Very white and very scared. So, kind of wobbly, and we were all being arrested. We were given choices to go back to our church 3 times, go back to your church, go back to your church, go back to your church, you're arrested.
Well, Nicole got arrested, but was out in time to get ready for the march to Montgomery.
Here's the beginning of the march. People are in their finery, waiting to march. What I mentioned before, the march started out with 2,000 people at that point. More people had come, and so we were all assembled in Brown Chapel. We're ready to go. We had the protection, and right here you see Martin Luther King. The leis were from Hawaii, I guess, which I didn't know, but I read about recently. Ralph Abernathy, John Lewis.
Though folks were excited to march and were buoyed by each other's spirits, there was some danger. The march planners even had to divert most of the marchers from a troublesome county.
This is Lowndes County. Only 350 people were allowed to go through Lowndes because it was so dangerous and so infested, really, with the Klan. It was easy for snipers to get somebody. So if we all started out at the march, but then we had to peel back either to Selma or on to Montgomery, and then after people got through Lowndes, we could join up again.
When the marchers all met up in Montgomery, they camped out, waiting for the rally.
Finally, we camped out at what they call the City of St. Jude, outside of Montgomery. It was wet, rainy, sleeping bags were soaked, and then a lot of the celebrities came in, Peter, Paul, and Mary, and there was a concert, and Joan Baez and Harry Belafonte, and there was all that.
Those big names lent themselves to the march, but the biggest moment came the next day when Martin Luther King Jr. spoke. Nicole and the new Brackett choir attempted to recreate the energy from those words.
So as you're coming in, and kind of gathering around, Martin Luther King starts to speak. And I'm sure everyone has heard his speeches, but I just wanted to read a little bit of this, How Long, Not Long, because think you're in the crowd now. You've just walked, piecemeal maybe, from Selma to Montgomery. And here's this man speaking in the incredible cadence of his voice. And it's ringing out through the 25,000 people that are massed. And he says, how long?
Not long.
Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. How long?
Not long.
Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. How long?
Not long. Have courage, my soul, and let us journey on. Though the night is dark, and I am far from home, let's be to God, the morning light appears.
So what do you do when you're 23 and coming off such a historic experience? Some marchers were staying in Montgomery and others were flying out. Nicole and Sean were trying to figure out what to do.
Sean and I were lucky enough to grab a hold of a farm truck, one of those big old things with wooden slats. And I remember jumping into it and very glad that we got it because we, well, actually, the fact is Sean and I didn't have any plans. And I guess this really got me. I mean, we were 23. So, plans, you know. I mean, yeah, we got here and we weren't sure. We wanted to go back to New York, you know. We didn't know what we wanted to do. So we got on the truck and we knew we could go back to Selma. We knew that. We didn't want to go to Montgomery. And so everyone's like really high. I mean, we'd done this thing and Martin Luther King, and we were feeling great, and people on the, cheering us. We were clapping and yelling, and then we got out of Montgomery, and then we kind of were getting into Lowndes County, and a voice said, "Women and children down," and I went right down because I knew enough now to be scared. And I remember scooching down and looking out the slats. And right next to me was this young kid, maybe 8 or 9, black child, and his eyes were so big. And we were both looking at one another, and we were both scared. And the trick is in Lowndes County, you always go the speed limit. So we hushed up and made our way through and got into Selma proper. But I remember that moment, certainly. And I think, well, yeah, I'll just continue with Lowndes County. But that's the road. That's the perilous piece of history that maybe shouldn't be so footnoted.
When Nicole got back from Selma, she and Sean were in for another experience of white resistance to the movement. Sean walked over to the federalized troops who were there to protect the marchers from violence.
So I watched him go over, and the guardsmen are there, and they look at him. They just break formation, and all of a sudden they circled around him. I'm thinking, but it didn't last long. They broke back. Sean comes out and he comes over, and I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, they told me to get my Jew boy ass back to New York City because in 12 o'clock they weren't federalized.
I'm sure you've heard the stories about white posses trailing black people down dirt roads and lynching them. Sure, you've also heard stories about those posses chasing and beating white people who are working with black people as well. Well, Nicole, our neighbor, had a harrowing experience like that with a group while she was walking through a black neighborhood in Selma.
Going down these little roads, and there were stray dogs and flowers, and we were just ambling. We had nothing really to do. And all of a sudden, we kind of felt creepy, like an intuition. Maybe we heard something. And we turned around, and we were being followed by a truck with white guys in it. And we sped up, and the truck sped up. And so we knew what was going on. What we didn't know is a black woman was looking at us, at the whole situation. She was in her yard, her little house behind, and she saw us. She was tending her flowers, I think, and she just went like this. And we skedaddled right into her yard, and that truck took off. And she just looked at us. She goes, And she said, you know how to get back to your church? And I'll tell you, it was funny. I haven't thought about having a church. I mean, at 23, I didn't think about having a church. I was so glad I had a church there. Yes, and no, we don't know how to get back to our church. So you come in. We come into the house, and she either drew us a map, or she just told us, because we weren't far away. I mean, we just weren't paying any attention. It was just right and the left, and we're back there. So she said, you go back directly. And then she said, but come back tomorrow, same time, directly, and I'll make you lunch. Okay, so we went back to Brown Chapel. Next day, we directly, without hesitation, went back to her little home. Her home couldn't have been more than 12 by 15 something. Wooden, tin roof. She had invited her next door neighbor, the deacon, to come. He was wearing his pressed white shirt, black deacon pants, and she said she had a big bed I remember a bed and a table, and she said, well, now you chillin', you sit there on the bed. And we sat there, and from that little stove, we got a plate each of fried chicken, collard greens, black-eyed peas, rice, I think cornbread, and for dessert, peach cobbler and chicory coffee. And that was one of the, I think, maybe the best meal, certainly the most memorable meal and the most delicious. And while we were eating, the rain came, and the rain on the roof, and sitting on that bed, and I felt so safe and so welcomed.
Now, 58 years later, Nicole is still making good trouble, helping Joanne Bland raise funds for the Foot Soldiers Park and Study Center. And you can join her too by donating through the link in the show notes. We'll close with the New Brackett Choir and audience, all singing We Shall Overcome. But first, some thoughts from two of the choir participants. And we'll start with a reflection by Ross Sneed, who attended the event.
I'm Ross Sneed. I live over on Island Avenue across from the school. Some friends suggested that we come over, and we're really glad that we did. I wasn't aware, although I'm not surprised, that somebody on Peaks Island had been at the march on Selma. It really opens your eyes to the sacrifices, the different world that we lived in in that time. And thank goodness we've made progress, but there's so much more to be made. And so that's why I think it's important to have events like this and to have the organization that this was supporting, that they are trying to remember not the leaders who we always talk about, but the foot soldiers. I think that's really important.
Ross's remarks are a reflection of what was on many minds that evening as people saw parallels with the ongoing struggle for justice in the 21st century amid police violence and systemic injustice. Mavorny Thompson was part of the choir and views the struggle for justice as a lifelong commitment.
Justice is, to me, the predominant value that we need to work towards. Our family growing up was quite poor, but a story that impressed me deeply was my father, who was Roman Catholic, was raised in the late 1800s and early 1900s in a place called Russell, Minnesota. And his family, in fact, in Russell, was the only Irish Catholic family in the community. And he told us the story of how he was so proud that at Christmas time, the school teacher in the town, came and stayed with his family for Christmas dinner. And that was a big, big honor. And he never had a bad word to say about anyone, ever. My mother, in the meantime, grew up in in Oklahoma in the early 1900s, and she was taught to cross the street if, in fact, a black person was walking on the sidewalk that she was also on. And I chose to believe what my dad did, or the meaning behind that. Well, I served on the State Human Rights Commission and also on the State Ethics Commission. And both of those organizations were formed by the legislature to promote both human rights and ethics in political advertising and so forth. And that was important for me that I was able and asked to do that. I want all of us to talk to our kids and our grandchildren. And I know of a conversation I had tonight and also at rehearsal on last night. Some of us as adults, some of our group as adults, do not understand, for instance, who George Wallace was, or what Lyndon Johnson did to promote civil rights, and what George Wallace in the obverse did to, discredit people's rights.
Longtime Islander and choir member Kay Taylor thinks it's important that young people were present for the event. She hopes that they'll use it to fuel advocacy in today's world.
My daughter is here and brought a bunch of teenagers because I think I heard Mavorny say that's an important thing we need to do, is let the next generation help them to understand what happened and how important it is to keep communication open and connections open and keep fighting for this. They need to know their history. And there's a movement now against teaching all of this history because it's uncomfortable. But they need to know it, they need to understand it, they need to be proud of everything that was done. A lot has been accomplished. And they need to understand the people who were strong and the faith that motivated people, and keep going, keep trying. It's not over yet. We need to keep supporting this democracy that we have.
To truly continue this mission, we need people and organizations that can teach the values, the principles, and the methods of the movement. Many thanks to Nicole for raising awareness of Joanne Bland's cause and teaching through her own life what dedication to civil rights looks like. If you want to be part of that story and make true the words of the anthem, We Shall Overcome, please do check out Joanne Bland's campaign for Foot Soldiers Park and Education Center in the show notes today. You can find that and all of the resources from this island event at peaksilentradio.com/goodtrouble.
We